Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fresh, your host. You're listening to LibertyRadioLive.com. Thanks for tuning in this morning. My pleasure to be here. I wish to continue our reading and discussion of the book The Vatican Billions by Avro Manhattan, a book outlining the rise of Antichrist in the world, the Pope of Rome. And this morning we'll continue our discussion where we left off yesterday in talking about the money-making, all-powerful signs and lying wonders of the Roman Catholic Church. One of the most powerful is the Lourdes cult, the apparition of Mary at Lourdes, France, made popular by Empress Eugenie, the wife of Napoleon III. This miraculous pilgrimage and the sale of water from the shrine of Lourdes, and how it has benefited the Roman Catholic Church and assisted her rise to power in the world. Just one of many Marian apparition sites around the world that makes Rome wealthy. Okay, it says, beginning on page 115, if you're following along in the book, page 115, about midway down the page, the third full paragraph, speaking of this apparition site of Lourdes, France, it says, Lourdes thus became a steady, ever-growing source of immense revenue. Millions of dollars were invested and are still invested in its promotion by the Roman Catholic Church and the state. It's a state-church effort, church-state effort, and by commercial and touristic enterprises. People come from all over the world to the Marian shrine at Lourdes in France, and it's a money-making monster. Now, it says nobody has ever known how much wealth the Vatican has amassed via the Lourdes cult, particularly since it has been promoted upon a world scale and therefore duly turned into a global money-making machine. While the Lourdes cult was being promoted in a business-like way, an event of the greatest consequence occurred in nearby Italy. The territorial provinces, for example, the Papal States, which the popes had received from Pepin and his successors back in the 8th and 9th centuries via the tricks and false documentation. We're talking about the donation of Constantine and the pseudo-Isidorian decretals again, the divine right of the Pope to rule the world, not only as a spiritual ruler of the world, but also the temporal ruler of the world. The Pope is not just a priest. He's not just a bishop. He's not just a spiritual leader. He is a king. And by divine right, he is the king of the world, according to these documents. Now, he had given to him the Papal States. They were conquered and given to him by Pepin, the father of Charlemagne. Okay, the Papal States are going to be lost now. It says the territorial provinces, the Papal States, which the popes had received from Pepin and his successors back in the 8th and 9th centuries via the tricks and false documentations, ceased to exist. The Papal States ceased to exist. They no longer were the property of the Pope. And it says they were incorporated into a newly united Italy. Sundry attempts during the precious decades to save their inevitable incorporation had all ended in failure. That in 1848, when the Roman people deposed the Pope, that's right, the Roman people had the sense to depose their own Pope, to strip him of his kingly power, to strip him of his kingdom. The Roman people deposed the Pope from being their king and proclaimed a republic. They were sick and tired of the abuse of the papacy, overtaxation, oppression, and they simply wanted to form their own republic. And the Pope, in reply, appealed to the Catholic nations, quote, for an armed intervention to free the Papal States of the Church from the faction of the rogues. All right, this is talking about when Victor Emmanuel rose up in Italy to strip the papacy of his Papal States and to bring the Papal States and all of Italy together in a constitutional republic. They wanted their own constitution, they wanted their own rights, they wanted the boot heel of the papacy removed from off their necks. And the papacy has always fulminated all kinds of anathemas to Victor Emmanuel in the formation of these republics. And basically stripping the Pope of his divine right kingship of Italy. All right, this was a big defeat for the Roman Catholic Church, but it says in 1870, here's the answer, here's how the papacy answers this diabolical, according to her interpretation, this diabolical usurpation of the papacy's kingly throne. It says in 1870, however, Napoleon III, having gone to war with Prussia, was soundly defeated. Remember, Napoleon III was the protector of the Pope. And he went to war in Prussia, and he was soundly defeated. Now the Pope doesn't have a defender in the world. It says the popes, having lost their main protector, could do nothing but shut themselves within the walls of the Vatican, where they remained without ever officially coming out. The word officially is in quotation marks. Trust me, the papacy never lost its power. It appeared to have received a mortal wound, okay, but it never died, and it's been healing ever since. It says the papacy never officially came out until after the Second World War. Okay, we're talking about the Lateran Accords, 1929. That's when the Pope got his temporal power back. That's when Mussolini granted the papacy its temporal authority. Once again, the Pope became a king, not just an ecclesiastical leader, but a government, the beast. All right? It says, the Papal States thus vanished from the map of Europe and from history forever. Okay? This was when the papacy lost all of his temporal power during the uprising of Victor Emmanuel, the stripping the papacy of its temporal power in the Papal States, uniting all of Italy in a republic, and the Pope just seemingly sequestered himself in the Vatican and didn't really have much influence for a long time. That's what the author says. He says the Papal States thus vanished from the map of Europe and from history forever. But I disagree with this author, and the Bible disagrees with this author. The Bible tells us that the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. Avro Manhattan says the Papal States vanished from the map of Europe and from history forever. Avro Manhattan says the papacy lost its temporal crown, but I'm here to tell you that the Papal States today are every state on the globe. Now, we have to understand this. The Bible tells us that the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her. All the kings of the earth pay homage to the papacy. It says of Rome, of Vatican City, it says that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. This is just an apparent defeat for the papacy. This stripping of the papal states, leading the world to believe that the papacy is no longer a king. But the Bible tells us otherwise. That it is not just the papal states that the Pope controls. It says that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth.
I just want to interrupt here for a second because Tom, in the meantime, has studied the deception of futurism much deeper. And we are going to bring out in the future videos that will show that this article that is shown here, Mussolini and Gaspari sign historic Roman pact, quote, the Roman question tonight was a thing of the past and the Vatican was at peace with Italy. In affixing the autographs to the memorable document healing the wound of many years, extreme cordiality was displayed on both sides, from the San Francisco Chronicle, February 11th, 1929. What we are going to prove in the future is that this quote-unquote healing of the wound, as it is said in this article, which most people equate to Revelation chapter 13, the healing of the head wound, that according to church teaching, and not only Roman Catholic, but most of all Protestant churches like Seventh-day Adventists and all other harlot daughters, teach that the wound was afflicted in 1798 with General Berthier taking the Pope captive, or as I found out a few years ago, and I was deceived and thought it was 1866, when the Vatican lost the protecting French troops in Napoleon III, as we can read here, in 1870, when Napoleon III, having gone to war with Prussia, in the preparation of that, the Prussians, or the French protecting troops of the Vatican left the Vatican unprotected, and therefore the wound was afflicted, so that it was counted from 606, as I exposed in the reading of Martin Luther's Antichrist book, because in 606 Emperor Phocas gave to the Pope of Rome the spiritual power of the Eastern and the Western Church, and we all thought that was the beginning of the 1260-year reign that is spoken of in Revelation 13, and it came to an end not in 1798 as the SDA teaches, 538 through 1798, but it came to the end in 1866 after being started in 606 AD. And both these numbers are wrong. They are completely wrong. And Tom has studied that in the meantime, and I have studied that in the meantime, and in the future we will bring out studies that show you that the affliction and the healing of the wound is something completely different than that, and that we have all been taken by our noses by the futurist deception of the Jesuits. So, whatever Tom says here, and kudos to him that he did that anyway, he did not know then what he knows now. I did not know then, surely not, I wasn't even a Christian at that time, what I know now. But I'm just telling you that in the future you can expect videos from us to come that will show the real deception. Because the author, Avro Manhattan, in this book, he plays along with the deception. He gives the intention with what he writes that the wound afflicted in Revelation 13 is the same as taught in all the Protestant churches. That's why Tom is commenting on this. So I just want to ask your patience and watch for future videos. We have today the 30th of March 2023, and I speak of future videos, and this recording happened in the month of May 2011. So you see, sometimes really a lot of time has to pass until understanding comes, and that understanding came, and it will come out in the form of videos, but that is not for directly. That's why I say it is in the future. In the meantime, rest assured, the 1260-year reign of Antichrist ain't over yet. The 1260-day-year prophecy has not come to a completion. Not in the past, not now where we live, and not in the near future. What exactly is the length of the 1260 days, or the starting and the end point, is something that will be revealed in those studies. And I'm just interrupting here the wonderful reading and discussion of Tom to tell you that in the meantime, through a more thorough Bible study by all of us, we came to a completely different and an absolute 100% Bible-proof understanding of the afflicting of the wound and the healing of the wound. So that's just what I needed to add here to this video from Tom, and now we're gonna go back to listen to him.
Not just the Papal States. So the Papal States just became the global states. That's where we're at today. That's what this book is all about. The Papal States as such were no longer the fiefdom of the Pope, but he simply made a fiefdom of the whole world. The Bible foretells this. Now, it says the Roman Catholic Church at last, with the exception of the tiny Vatican City, 109 acres, which eventually came into existence in 1929. He's speaking specifically about the Lateran Accords, where Mussolini gave back the Pope's temporal power. It says that 109 acres, which eventually came into existence in 1929, had no longer any earthly dominion to rule, says Avro, Manhattan.
And again, I for a second have to interrupt here because it is maybe some interesting historic facts that you are not very much aware of. This treaty of 1929 has been prepared for years already, and one of the main writers of this contract was a Matthias Erzberger, who was a minister of, I don't remember what his department was already, during the First World War, and they fomented in 1915 a secret treaty in London where they worked the contract out of the eventual Lateran Treaty in 1929. And you can read that in Matthias Erzberger's book. And Matthias Erzberger was, by the way, killed by Jesuits, I think in 1921. And I addressed that in an earlier reading of mine. I just don't know which book that was anymore because I did so many history studies that I just can't tell you where that exactly was. It is possible that it even was in the Secret History of the Jesuits, but I'm not sure of that. But Matthias Erzberger played a very important role of that. And I can maybe show you a picture here. There's by the way, a picture of Matthias Erzberger when he was assassinated. This is how he was found in the woods. As you can see, that is not a natural death that has overcome him. This is the book that I'm speaking about. Erlebnisse im Ersten Weltkrieg means experiences in the First World War. That is what Matthias Erzberger's book is all about. And in that book you can read about that treaty. Here is Matthias Erzberger again. So you have this picture here of him. And let's just see if I have a picture of the London Treaty. I'm just not sure anymore. Treaty of London 1915. That's the one that I was speaking of. Yeah. It was a secret pact between the Triple Entente, means all the quote-unquote allies that fought against Germany in the First World War, Russia, England, France, and even Italy. It took place on the 26th of April 1915. Italy was willing to switch side from the Triple Alliance to the Triple Entente, meaning Russia, England, France, and then later on the United States of America were the attacking powers of Germany, and Italy switched sides, and they dealt with this secret Treaty of London. If you have no understanding of this and you want to look that up, I ask you to do your own research a little bit. It is just a wonderful research that one can do. And if you want to get the book from Matthias Erzberger, you can get this from archive.org, but you can only borrow the book. You cannot download the book, you can only borrow the book. And I made a movie of it, somewhere on this computer, hidden, I guess. I borrowed the book from archive and then turned on my camera and turned off the pages, page by page, and went through the whole book. So I have that book on my computer in this way, but otherwise there's no way to get it. And it's in German, in Frakturschrift, in old German writing. I don't know if it has ever been translated into English, but this is just one extra information that I wanted to give to you, because so this Lateran Treaty of 1929 has been long before prepared and has all to do with the complete futurist deception of the Roman Jesuit order. Yeah. Okay. Now let's continue for Tom. Sorry for the interruption here.
Well, let me tell you, that stripping of the Pope's power was only temporary, very, very brief in the scope of world history. And it continues, it says, yet in that same year, while the papacy was being reduced to next to nothing in terms of temporal power, his kingship power, his prestige and territory, the dispossessed pontiff, having convened the First Vatican Council, used his spiritual puissance, his spiritual power, to elevate himself above all men, and indeed above human reason itself, with one single stroke. He did so by declaring himself infallible, something that no man had ever dared to do, says the author. But I'm here to tell you that the Pope of Rome is not the only one who has ever pronounced himself infallible. If you're a regular listener to Inquisition Update, you know that Nimrod, the God-man, who kept the people captive and led them all to commit a spiritual fornication against the Creator, to do that which God most abhors, to worship the sun and the moon and the stars, and to build a tower unto heaven, and to exalt Nimrod's throne above the heights of the clouds, to sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north, to be like the Most High. Nimrod, right after the flood. Nimrod was only the first. The second was Pharaoh. We all know that Pharaoh considered himself to be a God-man, just like Nimrod. He was infallible. He ruled with a rod of iron. And he abused God's people. He led them into idolatry, the same abomination that Nimrod did. Then we have Nebuchadnezzar, the God-man, the infallible God-man. And how do you say, Tom, that Nebuchadnezzar regarded himself as infallible? The Bible plainly tells us that the angel Gabriel came and gave the interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, which showed a man-like figure, a metal man figure, that I call it the metal man image. The head of gold, the shoulders and arms of silver, the thighs of brass, and the 2 legs of iron, and the feet and toes of iron and miry clay. Those are the 4 world empires that God said would exist until Christ returns. In succession, that head of gold was Nimrod's Babylon. That would be destroyed and replaced by the Medo-Persian Empire, and that would be destroyed and led in and succeeded in place by the Grecian Empire. And now the current empire, the Roman Empire, the 2 legs, both east and west. That's what we've been discussing, the Roman Empire. But Nebuchadnezzar said no. And what did he do? He commanded all the people, just like Nimrod and just like Pharaoh, to worship a man-made image. Only this one was all gold from head to toe. He was simply telling God, no, you're wrong. There will not be 4 world empires, but one, mine, the Golden Empire. The metal man image is not made of gold and silver and brass and iron. It's gold from top to bottom. It's the Babylonian Empire from now on. That's what Nebuchadnezzar demonstrated when he commanded all the people to come and worship his all-golden image. He was in direct defiance of the determination of the Creator. He put himself above the throne of Almighty God. He made himself the God-man. He made himself an idol. And he made a terrible mistake. But the papacy, just like his predecessor Nimrod and Pharaoh and Nebuchadnezzar, has given himself divine attributes, infallibility. And what does he do? He leads all the world to commit idolatry, to worship a man, a mere fallen man, instead of God. And he thinks he's a king. More than that, he calls himself the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. That's how the popes see themselves. And that's how they behave in the world. And just like Nebuchadnezzar, and just like Nimrod, and just like Pharaoh, who are all types of the papal archetype, the fulfillment of Nimrod, the fulfillment of Pharaoh, the fulfillment of Nebuchadnezzar is in the papacy today. And you must know, by this example alone, the papacy is Antichrist. And he's wrong. He's not infallible. I don't care whether he's speaking ex cathedra or not. He calls himself the Vicar of Christ, the replacement of the Son of God, and there is but one who replaced the Son of God when he went into heaven, and that was the Holy Spirit. He has blasphemed the throne of Almighty God in taking the position of the Holy Spirit on this earth. And in his mind, that makes him infallible. Blasphemy. Defining blasphemy. And God's people ought not to be any longer deceived about who the Antichrist is. Avro Manhattan has a lot of things right, but he's got a few things wrong. But we're going to keep continuing to read and study this book and eat the meat and spit out the bones. Chapter 15 of the book is entitled, "The Catholic Church is Once More Despoiled of Her Wealth in Europe and the Americas. More rough times for the church militant." It says, "The dogma of infallibility, by elevating the Pope beyond human regions." Remember Isaiah chapter 14, verse 12 through 14? That's what Satan prophesied that he would do. And he offered that to Jesus in the desert during his temptation, and Jesus rejected it. Why? Because Jesus isn't going to have a mortal kingdom. He's going to have a divine and glorified kingdom, a kingdom not of this earth. He rejected Satan's proposal, but Satan has found a man upon the earth to take up his offer. And the papacy, through the inspiration of Satan, not of God, but of Satan, has declared himself infallible. The dogma of infallibility. What do we mean about dogma? If you are a Roman Catholic, if you are baptized in the Roman Catholic Church, you must believe without any mental reservation whatsoever that the Pope is infallible. Or you are ipso facto excommunicated. That's what dogma means. You don't have a choice. You don't dare let your mind try to entice you to believe otherwise. You stop those thinkings right away. You stop those thoughts right away. The Pope is infallible. That's what was determined in 1870 at the First Vatican Council. The Pope proclaimed himself infallible and made it a dogma of the Church. Now that's how the Pope answers being stripped of his temporal power. You talk about brazen, bold audacity. You've just seen it. When the world says, no, we've had enough of you. We want your boot heel off of our necks. We want our own constitutions. We want our own government. We want to live in peace. And they strip him of his power and his territory. The Pope simply retaliates by declaring himself infallible. And then says, you must believe it. You must believe it. The dogma of infallibility, by elevating the Pope beyond human regions, enabled the papacy by such a timely masterstroke to lay the foundations of a novel structure directed at amassing the riches of the world with more efficiency than ever before. For if it is true that the loss of the territories of the Papal States had seemingly left the Roman Catholic Church a beggar, it is nevertheless equally true that in a society which was rapidly transforming itself, territorial losses meant much less than in the previous centuries, since the Western world by now had embarked upon a road where wealth was no longer confined to the ownership of land. The Industrial Revolution was transforming the West into an Aladdin's cave. Its treasures now were the multiplying factories, the opening of industrial markets, the appearance of embryonic empires based upon the goods produced by industry, science, and the organization of labor. The three new deities bent on the opening up of new countries, on the exploitation of new materials, and on the shepherding of the working masses, all of which could be enthusiastically, ruthlessly, and profitably exploited. We've all become slaves of the Pope because of the Industrial Revolution. That's what this author's telling us. We're talking about a transformation, a colossal transformation in the world. Prior to this period of which we are speaking now, the world had been basically an agrarian society. And in order to enslave the people, who were, by the way, largely ignorant, they couldn't even read. But in order to enslave those people, the Pope amassed land and wealth, kept the scriptures to themselves, and kept them away from the people. And even if they had the scriptures, they couldn't read. So the people became serfs. They tilled the soil. The Roman Catholic Church owned the land. Everybody was enslaved to the papacy. But something happened. The Protestant Reformation. And it nearly destroyed the Roman Catholic Church. The Protestant Reformation put the Bible in the hands of the people in their own language so they could read it. So people learned to read. I mean, after all, if you've got the Bible now in your own possession, you don't have to be spoon-fed by a Roman Catholic priest with an agenda. You've got your own Bible, and it's in your own language. Wouldn't you want to read for yourself the Word of God? So they learned how to read. And then they realized the Pope isn't who he's always said he is. And they left the Roman Catholic Church, and they stripped the Roman Catholic Church of the land and his power and his wealth and his control. They established republics, constitutions that separated the church from the state, or at least attempted to in many cases. But their love of learning continued. And not being enslaved to the church anymore, they actually got to profit from their own labors. They went to college. And when they went to college, they learned how to feed themselves other than behind a plow. They learned industry. They learned management. They learned science and how to benefit the world. And then we just naturally evolved from an agrarian society, an agrarian world, which had characterized the world all the way from the Garden of Eden to the present. It had now become an industrial world. And that it wasn't enough just to own the land, because the people had other means of sustaining themselves. They had liberated themselves. So if you're the Pope and you've lost control of the people through the Industrial Revolution, if you intend to enslave the people again, as you had during the medieval ages when they were all agrarians, serfs, working the Pope's land, you've got to rethink. And you've got to come up with another way to enslave the people. Because if the people don't worship the Pope, he's not a Pope. And if the people don't obey the Pope, he's not a king. So the papacy had to do a tremendous amount of adjusting in order to once again enslave the people. And now it says, seen in such a light, the loss of the papal states and of the immense territories which the Roman Catholic Church had owned in the past was almost providential, for it forced the papacy to take cognizance of this tremendous shift in the evaluation, production, and amassing of a new type of wealth. The process which had deprived her of her material wealth had not ended in 1870. Far from it. The advent of the quote-unquote pestilential theories, and what is he talking about? The papacy has decreed over and over and over that republics are a pestilence to the papacy. Independence, or what the Roman Catholic Church, the papacy particularly, defines as liberalism, in other words, liberating yourself from the Pope's control, is a pestilential error. Okay? The process which had deprived the Roman Catholic Church of her material wealth had not ended in 1870, far from it. The advent of the pestilential errors such as liberalism and democracy. Now let me define those terms for you from the papacy's point of view. What does the papacy consider liberalism? Those who have liberated themselves from the Pope's control. Those who now believe and teach things from the Bible that are directly contradictory to the customary, traditional, and blasphemous teachings of the Roman Catholic Church. to the papacy, if he calls you a liberal, he's telling you, you need to come back under my control. Now, the other term here used is democracy. What is democracy from the Pope's point of view? The Pope's point of view of democracy is contrary to the hierarchical organization of the medieval ages, where the Pope is at the top of the pyramid. He's the ultimate power, and all power comes from his breast. The kings of the earth rule at his behest. The Pope crowns the kings, and the kings must obey the Pope. It's a church-state hierarchical organization. Democracy is the inverse of that. The people are the government, and those in government office are servants of the people. And the people elect their servants. They're not appointed by the Pope anymore. The Pope has no jurisdiction to appoint a king anymore. That's why the papacy calls these pestilential errors: liberalism and democracy. And worst of all, it says, socialism had created a universal anti-clericalism. He's telling us that liberalism, which you might equally define as Protestantism, liberalism, democracy, and socialism had created a universal anti-clericalism. Now, what does anti-clericalism mean? It simply means against the priests. That's what liberalism did. It was against the priests. That's what democracy is. It's against the priests. And that's what socialism is. It's against the priests. It puts the people in a position of power. So anti-clericalism means rebellion against the Roman Catholic Church. From her point of view, it's rebellion. Liberalism, democracy, and socialism are anti-clericalism, anti-pope. Now it says many nations in the West set up governments, one of whose chief aims was to continue the process of church impoverishment. Look, if the Pope's nobody in the world anymore, why allow him to remain with all the riches and the land and control of everything? So they kept taking away from the church. Rebellion, confiscation of land, just anti-clericalism against the priest in Rome. It says liberal, democratic, agnostic, and openly hostile administrations did this throughout Europe. In Germany, Bismarck and Culture Camp paralyzed the church. And Culture Camp, if you've never heard the term before, and it's a relatively new term for me, it's a German expression, Culture Camp, which means cultural struggle. And certainly I've already described to you a cultural struggle. The Protestant Reformation, we've gone from an agrarian society to an industrial society. We've come from a clerical society where the priests have all the power to a Bible society where God is restored to the throne. And it's all working against the papacy. And this paralyzed the Roman Catholic Church. And it says, while in France, the semi-atheistic Republican regimes did not hesitate to carry out further despoliation of the Roman Catholic Church. So we have the liberals, we have the Democrats, we have the socialists, and now we have the agnostics and atheists all working against the papacy. It said all this was in addition to the Vatican's crushing financial debilities and the almost total exclusion of her influence from state, schools, and the army. So they're kicking the Pope out of everything. And it says in the newly united Italy, remember under Victor Emmanuel, they took away the papal states, They united all of Italy under a republic. It says, in the newly united Italy, inimical governments humiliated her in all fields, restricting her activities. Her is the Roman Catholic Church, restricting the Roman Catholic Church's activities in the very regions where she once had ruled unchallenged as a spiritual and a temporal power, as a church and a state power. Now it says, European anti-clericalism swept quickly into the Western Hemisphere, talking about United States, Canada, Mexico, Central America, South America, the Western Hemisphere, claimed by Christopher Columbus through Roman Catholic Spanish Ferdinand and Isabella at the behest of the papacy. Conquer all lands for the Pope. Make the world Catholic. Okay, the European anti-clericalism having trouble. European anti-clericalism swept quickly into the Western Hemisphere, though whereas in the North it was hardly noticed, thanks not only to the fluidity of North American society, to the predominance of Protestantism, and above all to the effective enforcement of the abhorred principle of the separation of church and state. The separation of church and state is anathema to the Roman Catholic Church, as we've so many times described. In Central and South America, it caused a devastation of cataclysmic proportions, since anti-clericalism, being against the Pope there was like a time bomb, ready to explode at the slightest tremor. It was a natural enemy of clericalism. Okay, the separation of church and state, liberalism, democracy, was a natural enemy of clericalism against the priests. Okay, it was a natural enemy of the priests, which had indeed brought it into being perhaps more violently than in Europe. For whereas in Europe those civil liberties and religious standards which chiefly prevent excess, abuse in other words, were protected by the state and by society at large, in South America such limitations were practically non-existent. The Church, notwithstanding the setbacks suffered during the Latin American War of Independence at the end of the 18th and at the beginning of the 19th century, by now had recovered, and this to such an extent that her power, both religious and temporal, had again become almost unparalleled. With this went her stranglehold upon the wealth of the nations. Her properties, represented by the ownership of land, real estate, agricultural and commercial establishments, not to mention her grip upon the banking system, and on the governments themselves. This is what's wrong in America today. She's got control of the Federal Reserve Bank. She's got control of our debt, and she's got control of the most powerful offices in Washington, D.C. Devout Roman Catholics, papal knights, occupying the most powerful offices in the United States government. Military, CIA, the Vice Presidency, the Presidency, the Cabinet, the Congress, and the Supreme Court. Not to mention the banks. Her properties, represented by the ownership of land, real estate, agricultural, and commercial establishment, not to mention her grip upon the banking system and on the governments themselves, had made her the true ruler of South American society, directly and indirectly. She had become the de facto government. Wouldn't you even describe that as the shadow government? A de facto government? That's what she is. not just in South America, but right here in the United States, the Roman Catholic Church had become a de facto government behind the sundry oligarchies of the various Central and South American republics. Rome's in control. And it says the explosions eventually came, none so potent as that which occurred in Mexico during the first decade of the 20th century. Most anti-clerical South American administrations came to power as a result of the popular reaction against the church's stranglehold on the life and wealth of the nation. The church was thoroughly disestablished. Her suffocating monopoly of education and politics was broken. Above all, her immense wealth was confiscated and redistributed among the land-hungry peasants. The Roman Catholic Church cried to heaven and accused the revolutionary forces of persecuting her religion. Religion consisting in this case, as so often in the past, of the solid, concrete, and profitable ownership of more than one-third of all the wealth in Mexico. You talk about a monopoly? The Roman Catholic Church owning a third of your country? And in Great Britain, even as much as half? What do you suppose it is here in the United States today? It says, for the church conveniently soft-pedaled the fact that until then, she had controlled more wealth than all the wealthiest Mexicans put together. And not only so, but directly or indirectly, she controlled more estates and more money than the Mexican government itself. Even worse, her manipulation of her wealth had become so detrimental to the already immensely poor Mexican peasants as to act as a veritable bar to any initiative, collective or individual, on the part of the Mexican people. And that's exactly the state of Mexico today. Completely controlled by the Roman Catholic Church, the people are suppressed, poor, destitutely poor. And guess what the Vatican is doing? Making sure that her Roman Catholic government in Washington, D.C. will not close the border. And they're coming to this country to strengthen the Roman Catholic Church in preparation for the Inquisition that Rome has planned for this Protestant land. You see how Rome can manipulate, keep the people starved to death, and then just give them opportunity wherever Rome needs them the most? And where does Rome need those destitute, starving, deprived, spiritually and physically deprived Mexicans? Right here, in the last bastion of Protestantism in the Western Hemisphere. I'm telling you, Rome is preparing to do what she has always done. And why do any of us wonder what is going to happen in this country? Why does there need to be an Inquisition update to educate God's people when they should already know this? They've stripped all the critical history out of our history books. They've stripped all of our Protestant understanding from our Bibles and from our churches. And they've prepared us for our defeat. And we've simply got to get a grip. A historical and biblical grip on the truth. And an understanding of Bible prophecy. Because it lays out the scenario so vividly that it can't be denied unless one is just willfully in denial. Now it says, with the aid of her lay partners, the great landlords, the Roman Catholic Church had in fact become the great paralyzer of the agricultural and commercial energies of the entire Mexican nation. The Roman Catholic Church reacted to the expropriation of her wealth with something more than lamentations. She engineered a most destructive civil war. This is what happens when you defy the papacy. She incites a civil war. That's right in the Jesuit oath. It's no secret to anybody if you have the information. The church reacted to the expropriation of her wealth with something more than just mere lamentations. She engineered a most destructive civil war which tore Mexico apart for several years, making a whole decade, 1920 to 1930, with risings, mutinies, assassinations, and massacres. And listen to this. Catholic bishops, priests, monks, and even nuns took active part. Witness the assassination of President Alvaro Obregón of July 17, 1928, by a Catholic sent by the Mother Superior of a Mexican convent. Now everybody thinks the Roman Catholic Church is Christianity. Why? The Roman Catholic Church committing assassinations and war? No, it's the Roman Catholic Church, the harbinger of peace and unity. But we have history. This history that we're reading, the history of the Second World War, which we covered in L.H. Lehman's book, Behind the Dictators. We have the war fomented by the Roman Catholic Church called the Vietnam War, a holy war against the Buddhists. In Avro Manhattan's other work, Vietnam, Why Did We Go? Do we understand now what the war against the Muslims in the Middle East is all about? More control. And what's her objective? God's holy hill in Jerusalem. The Pope wishes to rule the world from where Christ died for you and me. And that's why the border with Mexico is open. And the starved Roman Catholic Spanish invaders are coming into this country at the behest of our own government. That's the reality. Frightful, isn't it? Well, we don't have to be afraid. We have to be repentant. We have to be educated. We have to be led by the Scriptures. We have to be led by God's law. We have to repent of our sins. And we have to solicit God's help. My people who are called by my name, if they will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sins, and I will heal their land. That's the message of Inquisition Update. If it doesn't happen, the Inquisition is breathing down your neck. Talk about it tomorrow on Inquisition Update. Thanks for listening.